All right, so let's just continue with this um, set of tips for your idea section of the exam. You'll very likely be given a spreadsheet where you'll type in the student ID, and then you'll be asked to look at a set of transactions that will be updated based on your student ID. So everybody will get their own set of records per se, and then you'll have different payments received. So one of the things that I will ask you to do is import this into an actual idea project. So a way to do that would be, as we already know, is to, and by the way, you'll be given a bunch of data and you should only be downloading the stuff that you need. So let's just say that the question is, based on a list of cells, provide me those cells that have not received a payment, right? So which cells transactions have not received a payment at all? So then you would come in and download the cells first of all. And the easiest thing to do is to make sure that you just do it on a CSV file or a TSV. I'm just going to go with the CSV because it looks like everybody knows how to use that. And here are the payments. Here are the customers' inventory. Yeah, I could download them all, but I know that all I need is my payments received. I'll make it very simple. So download as a CSV file. Once I have both CSV files, then I can go in. I'm going to ask you, obviously, to rename this. You guessed it under Para Fernando, right? Payments received. Um, Para Fernando sales. And now you can start idea. Oh, I guess you're not seeing that, but these are my files. And then now you can start idea, and you'll have to create a new project that is for the exam. So let me call exam to practice, right? So let me make sure that I put that as the project name. And now I can grab my files from this section. I'm gonna cut them and go to my idea, to my idea projects, and find the one that says exam to practice, which is just created. We're gonna put them. We're gonna put our files in the source files. Now we have this contained in the same package, right? So when I'm looking at my projects, all the files are within. The next thing I want to do is, get rid of this because it's closed. Um, we're done with that. So now let's make sure that we import those two files. So we would have to import them by text because they're a CSV file. Let's start with the sales one. The sales file is a delimited file, right? This is not a fixed length, but they're delimited, meaning every field is separated by a particular character, which in this case is a comma. The first row will always contain field names, very likely, right? Um, Sales orders will become a unique identifier, therefore that should have to be a character. So you'll have to actually change the type of field that you're using, right? In this case, you'll have something like account number, sales date. Well, that sales date is a date, and therefore it should be masked the same way that you use the date in your projects, YYY Inventory is character, order quantity is numeric, and it does not have any decimals. The sales rep should be a character field. The customer city should also be a character field. And lastly, the sales order amount should be a numeric field with two decimals. Otherwise, you lose the decimals. Having done that, then that's all I need to do to import it. I may want to keep this para Fernando sales. That's great. I finish it and it's done. The next thing I'm going to do is make sure that I am importing a different file, which would be my payments. So my payments received would be here. Next, also delimited file by CSV because we downloaded it that way. I will go back and make sure that this sales order amount is also a character field because we're not using that to multiply. Customer name, account number, uh, are also character fields. Payment date is a date field with the following date mask. Your payment amount should be a numeric field with 2 decimals. And that should do, in terms of the import, I could generate the field stats for each one, but let's just finish it. All right. So the question here was, which transactions are not paid at all? Which transactions have not received a um, a payment? I think I might have. Let's find out how many field statistics I have. There's 5,000 transactions, and then there's 5,000 transactions here as well. So it's possible all of them are paid. So let's find out. How do we check this? Number one, I want to make sure that I first open the cells, and then I have to unite it via an analysis of a join. So we're going to relate these two fields by joining them. And when I activate the join, I'm going to say my primary database has to be sales, and my secondary database will have to be the payment. So let me expand on this. I'm going to select the payments. And the very next thing that I should look at is, how do you want to match both of those files? So I have different types of unique identifiers or potential unique identifiers. I could do it by account number. I could do it by sales rep, etc. In this case, if I want to know if a customer has paid us, I most likely will look at the sales order itself or the account number. Well, let's see how the payments are structured. They're structured by account number, by by sales order ID as well. So let me make sure that I get that sales order number. So why don't we just go with sales order number, because that would be a better fix. I can always do this by account, but I want to make sure that each individual transaction is paid within the right time. And in an accounting system, you should always relate payments to their particular invoices to make sure that they're paid, as we learned through our revenue cycle. So we're going to use a sales order number, right? And then I'm going to call this sales with no payments, right? So here's the thing. Which one should we use? There's 5 options. We can do matches only. Now the matches are those, if you look at the yellow circle, let me see if I can move. No, I can't move. If you look at the yellow circle, that represents sales. And if you look at the blue circle, that represents payments. So what's highlighted is those cells that have payments on them. And I could have asked you that question. Which cells have payments in them, right? Here I'm going to ask you for, this option gives you records with no secondary match, meaning records from the primary database that have no secondary match, or no match in the secondary database. If the first database or the primary database are cells, or is cells, then the second database would be payments. That means that you're getting records or cells with no payments. And that was the questions, right? Give me those cells with no payments. So that would be the optimal one. If I was looking to see payments with no sales, or payments that are not related to an invoice, this is where you would find them. These are all the payments represented in blue that are not associated with any of those sales. And then we go on to the next one. And here you are getting both the matches that are in the middle and all the records on the primary file, whether they have payments or not. This would be useful if I were to ask you, give me those transactions that have not been paid fully. And then finally, if you just want to get them both, and then you can do some filtering at the end, this is what you would do, all records in both files. So to answer the first question, cells with no payments, this would be it. Records with no secondary match. If I wanted to ask you, in addition, only give me those transactions that have more than $1 million worth of sales, because those are the only ones that we should worry about. Then I can do a filter that says sales order amount is greater than $1 million, right? And I can validate and close, and I can press it all. And so that would immediately create a filter of those transactions that are over $1 million that have no payments whatsoever. And that's it. So this would be one option, right? The other option would be, let me close this. What if I wanted to look at payments right, that have no sales orders associated with that. Well, we would do the same thing. We'd do a join. In this case, we would choose the sales versus payments, matching by both the sales order ID, and then I would, let's say that there's no records, no filter, nothing at all. So then you could say records with no secondary match. That was to look at the payments. So this would be sales with no payments. In this case, would be payments with without related sales, right? So then we want to make sure that we are using the blue sign here. I see the circle that says, let me hover over it. So you see the circle has the blue circle representing payments that are not associated with the cells on the left. Let me make sure that I bring all the fields from both transactions and press OK. Well, in this particular example, I have plenty of payments that are not associated with any account or any particular sales order number. And that makes total sense, right? There's a few that are simply not payments that are simply not associated with them. That's great. So what about having payments? Let's say that I were to ask you for a random selection of records. Then you would do the random selection by first activating the cells, and then I would say do a random selection. We have 5,000 records, so from 1 to 5,000, give me 100 random records. And I may give you a very specific number seed, right? Like a 420, for example. And that would give you 100 transactions. I may change the seed number based on your student ID, and so forth. And then let's say that I were to ask you for this random sample. Let me close it and rename it for a second. Let's say that from this random sample, I were to ask you, show me from this sample which transactions did not receive a payment. So then you would just use this random sample, right? And you would use this random sample to join it with our payments. So let's go ahead and select the payment records or the payments received records. We have to match them using the sales order number, right? There's no additional criteria. So if I'm looking for sales without payments or random, let's do random sales without payments. This is the way you would do it, right? So we were looking at the random sample with no secondary match, period. In this case, we only have one transaction, right? So everybody would get a different random selection and your answers would be very different. But this is pretty much what I'm asking for. What if I were to ask you now to give me a direct extract based on the following criteria? You can do an extraction. You could say, um, let's say that I wanted only those transactions that were greater than 1.5 million, right? So then that would be called um, large transactions, right? And let's say that I wanted to um, find out if these have been paid. So then again, we would join this. Let me close these. I would join the large transactions with my payments, right? And let's make sure that's in there, payments received. And I would match them by sales order. And then I would say, give me those large transactions with no secondary matches. And there you go. And so there will be a few that are like that. Again, these numbers are going to be very different for everybody. Um, and And I hope this kind of helps. So keep trying those. Ask yourself questions. What if I were to ask a combination of an extraction plus a join? So you'll have to do an extraction and a join together, or an extraction that is separate. I may want to do a gap detection, for example. Give me all those gap detection based on order. Um, no criteria. Just call them gap in orders, and there doesn't seem to be one. That's wonderful, right? So we can keep going and so forth. If we have, and that you may have answers where you have no records, and that's perfectly fine. What else could we be asking for? I may be asking for the top records, based on the number of products that are sold, or based on your sales order amount. And let's say that I were to ask you for the top um, 50 records, and that's it. You would just grab them all, and then you have the top 50 records based on the amount. And then from there, I could ask you which one of those hasn't gotten paid. So be ready to do some print screens of that. And then at the very end, make sure that you understand how to provide me with your history that is expanded completely, so that I can copy paste it into your exam. And everything's probably going to be based on Google Classroom, where you'll submit everything, or on Blackboard. Most likely Google Classroom. I hope this helps, guys. I've enough talking. Thank you.